afternoon, children. Welcome to online class. I am Mrs. Anandhi, your social science teacher. Today, we are going to discuss about history, new chapter, Industrial Revolution. What is Industrial Revolution? The manufacturing of goods moved from small shops and homes to large factories. The shift brought about changes in industries. In part 1, we are going to learn about attributes of Industrial Revolution, beginning of Industrial Revolution, invention of steam power, development in textiles, iron and steel industry, mining, and transport and communication. In the later half of 18th century, major changes occurred in the method of production that changed the history of humankind. This profound transformation is described as Industrial Revolution. Goods began to produce not by hand but by machines. This increased the volume of goods produced. The changes were not only economic but made a profound impact on society and politics. Society transformed from an agrarian and handicraft economy to one dominated by factory and machines. Machines started production. It started in England first. It spread to other parts of the world. Although it is used earlier by French writers, but the term Industrial Revolution was popularized by the English economic historians to denote Britain's economic development from 1760 to 1840. And what are the causes of Industrial Revolution or attributes of Industrial Revolution? Use of new basic materials, iron and steel. Use of new energy sources, coal, electricity, petroleum. Invention of new machines such as spinning jenny and power loom that increase the production with a minimum expending of human energy. Emergence of new organization known as factory system, which entailed in increased division of labor and specialization of work. Development in transportation and communication. Increasing application of science to industry. The use of new technology. So these new methods are used in Industrial Revolution. And what causes leads to Industrial Revolution? The population growth, agricultural improvements, increased trade, technological progress, financial support from agriculture and trade, favorable political and social structure. These are the major factors favorable for industrial development or Industrial Revolution in Great Britain. Next, in the beginning of Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution began in England first because it had certain external factors. They are: England had abundant resources and possessed colonies, with India being the brightest jewel in the British crown. Access to coal, iron and raw cotton from the colonies. England possessed the required infrastructure for textiles developed by immigrant artisans from the Netherlands. England had developed banking system, a growing entrepreneurial class and potential investors. Encouragement of Royal Society of England for scientific discoveries and inventions. political stability of England to bestow its full attention to industrial growth. So these are the growth favorable industrial revolution started in England. Next, the development in steam power. In the 18th century, British mine owners were faced with the problem of water seeping into the mines. Water had to be removed to extract coal. So they employed additional laborers to pump the water out. Employing human labor cost a lot of money. It was at that juncture the British engineer Thomas Newcomen invented a contrive to pump the water out of mines. But the mechanism had developed consumed too much fuel. James Watt, a Scottish engineer, converted a stationary steam engine to a rotary engine which consumed less fuel. Next, the development in textile industries. Before the Industrial Revolution, the spinning and weaving of cloth were undertaken for domestic and local consumption. It was done at home or in a small hired place. The production also took place on a cottage scale. The manually operated spinning wheel required 4 to 8 spinners to supply yarn to one handloom weaver. In 1733, John Kay invented the flying shuttle, which, when operated by hand, increased the speed of weaving of cloth. In 1764, James Hargreaves invented the spinning jenny. This machine spun 8 threads at one and the same time. 2 years later, Richard Arkwright invented the water frame. This spinning frame used water power in the place of manpower. The water frame was too big to be run at home. Thus, was born a factory. In 1779, Samuel Crompton invented his spinning mule, which included a combination of both the spinning jenny and the water frame. It spun hundreds of threads stimulously and produced 8 fine and coarse threads. Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin in 1793, removing the seed from the cotton. Textile manufacture was at the heart of Industrial Revolution. Over a span of 50 years, the textile manufacturing industry in Britain witnessed a transformation in the method of production from handmade to machine-made goods. The newly invented machines enabled factories to produce textile goods in large quantities. Derbyshire, Lancashire, Cheshire, Staffordshire, Nottinghamshire and Yorkshire became a major factory centers in England. The most notable was Manchester, which had more than 50 mills in 1802. These factories involved in mass production were organized on the principle of division of labor. Next, the development in iron and steel industries. The rolling mill, that is machine for rolling steel or any other metal into sheets. It proved to be 15 times faster than hammering wrought iron. Hot blast greatly increased fuel efficiency in iron production. In 1856, Henry Bessemer discovered a faster and cheaper method of producing steel. In course of time, iron and and steel came to be used in making all machines and in all industries. Next, the development in mining. The development of factories by Arkwright and the improvement of steam engine by James Watt further increased demand for coal. As a result, coal mines became deeper and deeper, making it more and more dangerous. As miners used oil lamps in the mines, the risk of explosion was high, leading to the death of miners. This was reduced by the invention of a safety lamp by Sir Humphrey Davy in 1850. Next development, transport and communication. Industrial revolution was dependent on good transportation. As production increased, raw materials had to be brought from far to the factories. After the goods were produced, they had to be transported to the market. As a result, new network of canals, roads and railroads were built. Mac-Adam's road and George Stevens' steam locomotive helped to improve road and railway transport system in the country. John Loudon MacAdam was a pioneering Scottish engineer who single-handedly changed the way roads were built around the world. Mac-Adam's road came to be adopted world over. The railways date back to 6th century BC in Gorinith, Greece. They were man or animal driven. In the 16th century, Germany had horse-powered rail transport. Modern rail transport commenced with the British development of steam locomotives in the early 19th century. The first railway line in England was opened between Stockton and Darlington in 1825. In the next 40 years, 15,000 miles of railway network was completed. Robert Fulton of the US invented the steamboat called Clermont in 1807 that sailed from New York to Albany, it covering 150 miles. After a few years, steamboats carrying cargo shuttled on the rivers and coastlines. By 1830, the 40 miles between Manchester and Liverpool could be covered in an hour and a half. In part 2, will be continued the effects of Industrial Revolution. In part 2, we are going to discuss about effects of Industrial Revolution, urbanization, socio-economic consequences and labor movement. First, the effects of Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution led to the expansion of trade, the production of more food, emergence of factory workers as new class, the rise and growth of cities resulting in rapid urbanization and organized working class movement seeking voting rights and regulation of their service conditions brought about a new dynamic in politics. Next, impact on environment. The use of chemicals and fossil fuels that replaced wind, water and firewood resulted in increased air and water pollution. The Industrial Revolution marked a major turning point in Earth ecology and humans' relationship with the environment. The Industrial Revolution helped create opportunity for employment for all members of the family. However, The life for the laboring class was miserable. Children were employed in textile mills because they worked for lower wages. In 1842, the British Parliament published a report about the state of coal mining, the Mines Report. Safety was very poor in early industrial factories and mines. The injuries from machinery would vary from mild burns, arm and leg injuries to whole fingers to be cut off or amputation of limbs and even death. The housing was tiny, dirty and sticky for the laboring class. Workers had no time to clean or change their own atmosphere even if they were wished to, leading to the outbreak of typhoid, cholera and smallpox. Next, urbanization. With the advent of Industrial Revolution, England became the workshop of the world. There was, however, a general decline in agriculture. This resulted in the flow of population from villages to industrial towns. Population growth, migration, and urbanization were the major social changes taking place during this period. In pre-industrial society, over 80% of people lived in rural areas. As the migration from the countryside began to intensify, small towns became large cities. The city of London grew from a population of 2 million in 1840 to 5 million in 40 years. Manchester's cool climate was ideal for textile production. Further, it was situated close to the port of Liverpool and the coal field of Lancashire. Manchester became the textile capital of the world, drawing huge numbers of migrants to the city. In 1771, Manchester was a sleepy town of 22,000 people. Over the next 50 years, its population exploded and reached up to 1,80,000. Next, the socio-economic consequences. While the peasants were pauperized and the working class suffered, the middle class became wealthy by investing capital in trade and industry. The governments of the day were influenced by them. All legislation safeguarded their interest. Laborers were not permitted to form trade unions. It was under these circumstances that socialism as a new ideology was born in Europe. Karl Marx advocated scientific socialism for the protection of the working class from the exploitative policies of the capitalist class. By the later half of 19th century, there were strong working class movement all over Western Europe which demanded economic as well as political rights. Next, the labor movement in England. The Reform Bill of 1832 granted voting rights only to the propertied middle class. Frustrated by this, the working class in a large gathering prepared a charter of demands and obtained signature from millions of fellow workers. The charter was presented to the House of Commons, that is the English lower house in the Parliament of England, known as Chartism. This working class movement was active between 1836 and 1848. The Chartists called for voting rights to every man over 21 years of age, secret ballot, abolition of property, qualification for members of the parliament, annual parliamentary elections, and equal representation. So these are the changes made in labor movement. So that's all for today's class. Thank you, children.